guys in the dark.
This happened on St. Patrick's Day of 2009, just after I had gotten my license. My friend Eric and I had nothing to do. We decided to cruise around the pike. We were enjoying the fact that I could finally drive at night. Prior to driving down the pike, we had stopped at a convenience store so that we can get some food. As we were sitting in my vehicle, getting ready to eat the food, an older, thin black woman had approached my vehicle. Being an anxiety-stricken teenager, I didn't do anything. She had tapped on my window, which I rolled down just a crack. I had noticed that she had a lazy eye. She was also dressed somewhat promiscuously. She was a twig. Her stockings were loose on her bare-boned legs. She had looked at me with the one normal eye, asked if I can give her a ride to the liquor store just a couple of miles down the road. Being a dumb kid, that's exactly what I did. Eric had gotten out of the passenger side, and he sat behind it instead. The woman had gotten in and sat right beside me. She kept thanking me the whole way, making an effort to constantly point out how sweet we were for doing this for her. As we drove, she had started asking us questions. It had all started off as small talk. Eventually, she asked if we were looking to party. We told her that we were not looking to party. She smiled and then said, "Oh no, two good-looking boys like yourselves? Must be trying to party tonight." I kept telling her that we were just trying to have a calm and normal night. She mentioned that a friend of hers had gotten off of work, asked if we would like a Hispanic woman, which was a very what-the-hell, out-of-the-blue kind of question. I told her I didn't really mind Hispanic women, I suppose. She had smiled at me. Good. She's looking to party tonight as well. I have no clue why it took me so long to figure it out. It was just about that time when that thought had popped into my head. I think we just picked up a hooker. If that really was true, then I had already broken the law. A bit of me had went into panic mode, as she proceeded to ask us even more questions. She asked us if we drank. Then she reminded me that I was taking her to the liquor store. We had finally reached the liquor store. As I pulled in, I noticed the parking lot was empty except for one pickup truck. A man was seated in the driver's seat of the truck. Once he had seen me, he turned on his car and drove around me, blocking the exit. My first thought was, oh shit, it's an ambush. The man had stepped out of his vehicle, then started yelling at me. I rolled down the window to hear what he was saying. He told me, "She's bad news, man." Without hesitating, I had turned off my car, grabbed my keys real quick, and then I jumped out of the car, not shutting the door behind me. "What do you mean?" I had asked him. "That woman in your car happens to be a prostitute." This had confirmed my earlier suspicions. She had walked around that Wawa back there, asked men to drive her to go buy booze, and then to a motel about a mile or so down the road. She happens to be bad news. I was relieved that this guy was on my side. I let out a sigh of relief. I asked him to help me. Again, I happened to be a stupid teenager. I had no idea what the hell I should do. The lazy-eyed woman stuck her head out of the open door, asked if everything was okay. The guy from the pickup angrily had yelled at her, "Get out of the car now!" She didn't listen to him. I could hear her muttering something. It sounded like, "They're cool. It's all cool." My savior in the pickup truck had marched over to the car, swung open her door. Then he growled at her to get out one more time, and didn't even wait for her to respond. He had grabbed her, pulled her out, shoving her away from my car. The entire time I could hear her mumbling, "No, everything's all right. They said that they're cool with it." As my friend had stepped out of the back seat, hopped right into the front seat, slammed and locked the door right behind him. The guy had yelled at her one more time. She disappeared right behind the liquor store. I had thanked him so many times. He warned me not to pick up strangers again, right before driving off. I had hopped back into the car and sped away. My nerves were shot to oblivion. When I was 20 years old, my parents had come to visit me during one of my college breaks. They had stayed at one of the Holiday Inns, which was surprisingly rather nice given that it was located on a bad section of town right off of I-95. After doing a day of various activities throughout the city, We decided to go to their hotel room to order some pizza, then watch some basic hotel cable. After some quality time spent with my family, I grabbed the leftover pizza. I walked to my truck, which was about 30 or 40 yards away from their room. I got in and started up my truck. I was ready to head back to my apartment, when suddenly I was greeted with a quick knock on my window. It was a middle-aged white woman, who was a little weathered looking. I happened to roll down the window, just to halfway. She started with one of those fake stories. You know, the ones that every bum starts off with. The kind that you tune out just after the first few words, because you know it's complete bullshit. I cut her off. I blurted some kind of excuse as to why I couldn't drive her to the gas station. At least I think that's what she needed. I'm not really sure. She took it quite well. Then she saw the pizza box sitting in the passenger seat. Her eyes had brightened. She asked me if she could have a slice. I told her no, that I didn't have much food, and that I loved pizza. She then licked her lips. She told me, "If you give me a ride to the store and a slice of that pizza, I'll suck you off." For whatever reason, I was flabbergasted by this. All I remember doing is just grabbing a fistful of change out of my cup holder, and then chucking it at her, then driving off. I don't know why I reacted to that. To this day, many years later, I'm still reminded of this encounter, because I have a squeaky noise when I roll down my driver's side window, just because a coin had gotten lodged in there when I threw the change at her. I still laugh at it today, because given the proximity of where the hotel room was, they could have stepped out at any moment, and then they would have seen their son being solicited by some hooker who just gives out BJs for a pizza. I'll make this short. I hope that I'm doing this right. This happened back in 2012. I was a recent transplant to North Carolina, and I had recently lost my job and headed to the Bay Area. I decided while I was looking for a job, I'd stay in a Motel 6 in East Oakland with my pit bull, Jeromeo. One night I decided to walk about a quarter of a mile up the road to Jack in the Box with Jeromeo for a late night snack. On my way back, as I'm walking across the entrance to an abandoned hotel, a shitty little Ford Focus cuts in front of me, cuts me off, and abruptly stops. I don't know if my explanation will do the next part justice, but I will try. Out of the car hops an overweight lady dressed like a drag queen with shabby clothing. Threads were frayed. There were old stains on her shirt, and her hair was a mess. Before I could see her face, she started talking to me. It was almost like she was hiding her face. The words I could make out of her garbled sentence were date and baby. It sounded like she had a mouthful of marbles. I tried to ignore her and continued walking, but she cut me off again, with her body this time, and tried to touch my arm. When she reached out for my arm, I got a glimpse of her face. This is when I got freaked out. She was a black lady, like Denzel's shade. Her face was riddled with what looked like open sores and pock marks. There was a sheen of liquid that covered her entire face that looked like a pus and blood mix. It had a greenish-pink tint to it. I noticed this on the back of her hands, too. You can imagine that I was thoroughly disgusted. I instantly went into flight mode, sidestepped her, and dragged Rome away from her. Quickly, she protested with a mouthful of jibber-jabber, but I kept moving on, quickly. I looked back to see her car pulling out and heading in the opposite direction. So, crackhead, prostitute, zombie lady, I really don't want to see you again. To give a little background information, this started in the winter of 2012. I was 23 years old at the time and living with my dad. My mom and my brother were living in another house about 10 minutes away from us. One morning I woke up around 8 a.m. because I had an early doctor's appointment, and I went outside to see a note pinned to the windshield wiper of my car. The note said, "I'm going to kill you, fucking pedophile scum." I kind of just laughed it off. I assumed the note was for my dad, who had a habit of complaining to parents in our neighborhood about their children's shitty behavior. There were these twin boys who liked to try and catch and torture squirrels. He often marched them home by the ears to complain about them to their parents. I thought one of the parents was just being a douchebag, so my dad and I didn't bother with it too much. Later in the day, while talking to my mom on the phone, I mentioned the note to her offhandedly in a very casual way, and I was shocked by her response. She responded by very empathetical, warning me several times to make sure all of my windows and doors were locked, and to bring a weapon to bed with me at night. I was a bit taken aback, because she never said anything to me like that before. She never even given me a good touch, bad touch talk. She reminded me at least 12 times over the course of the conversation to bring a knife or a baseball bat to bed with me, and to lock my bedroom door at night. I thought she was just overreacting, so I just waved her off. Then other weird things started happening. We started getting random packages and deliveries sent to our house. Bibles and Qurans, newspapers, porn flyers, pizzas, and moving trucks that we hadn't ordered. The first few times it happened, I thought it was a mistake. But as it kept happening, I came to the conclusion that somebody must be pulling a prank on us. We didn't know who it was, so there's nothing we could really do about it but apologize profusely to yet another confused pizza delivery man. In September of that year, I started taking a night school class with my best friend. The course went from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. every Monday and Wednesday night. And after the class, his mom would pick us up and drive us home. Sometime in November, his mom dropped us off from school, and I went inside and chilled on the couch for a couple of hours. I like to wind down before I go to bed a bit, or I can't sleep at all. I ended up falling asleep on the couch. Something woke me up abruptly at about 4 o'clock in the morning. I heard the unmistakable sound of a car tire being slashed, and it sounded like our car. What the hell was going on? We didn't have any enemies. In retrospect, this was probably a stupid thing to do, especially considering that I'm a relatively small female. I'm only 5'5", and I was 23 at the time. But I grabbed a generic knife from the kitchen and went outside to check it out. When I got outside, I discovered immediately that I was correct. There was a man in our driveway, slashing our car tires. Unwisely, I immediately yelled, "Hey, you!" and he turned around to face me. That was when I noticed that he was slashing our tires with an enormous hunting knife, at least 6 inches long. He looked surprised, but then defiant, and began to advance towards me with the knife slightly raised. I just froze. I didn't know what to do. He was coming at me so fast, I couldn't even think. Thankfully, at that exact second, my across-the-street neighbor, who also heard him slashing our tires, turned on his porch light and yelled out the window, "Hey, I'm calling the cops." The man yelled back, "I don't give a fuck. Call them then." Then he retreated back to his car, where I could see a middle-aged woman with long brown hair waiting for him in the passenger seat. Our eyes locked, and I knew instantly that we had met before, but I couldn't quite put my finger on when or where. I just knew in my gut that I had met this woman before. They sped off into the night, and we called the cops, who said that they couldn't do anything for us because they didn't know who had done it. I mean, isn't that kind of your job, though? To find out who did it? Herp-a-derp. I called my mom to tell her what happened, and to ask her if she had any idea who would have done this to us. She immediately said no, but there was something in her voice. I could just tell that she wasn't being honest. A few weeks later, I decided to go to my mom's house to spend a day or two there, determined to get some answers from her. As soon as I walked in the front door, I knew something was wrong. The second that she saw me, she just started bawling her eyes out. She took me by the hand and sat me on the couch and explained the whole story to me, start to finish. It's a little necessary for me to give a little background information here. My mother is a businesswoman by trade. She was still in sales at the time. But she's also a bit of a hippy-dippy, astrology and pot and reincarnation, Mercury is retrograding type, so don't get into any arguments this week, type of lady. On the side of her regular day job, she was also selling Arbonne makeup, which is an all-natural brand of makeup that is free of parabens, oils, sulfates, and other common cosmetic additives. A couple of months before this all started, she had ended up being referred a new client named Andrea by her weed dealer. Yes, my mom smokes. This is Canada. Everybody smokes here. Andrea was her dealer's girlfriend, and she was interested in buying some makeup. So my mom invited her over to her apartment to look at some makeup samples. They started chatting a bit about a variety of topics. as women usually do, and my mom let it slip that her last name was Hayes. As my mom told me, Andrea had paused for a few seconds, looked at her, and then said, "Hayes? Did you used to be married to a man named Darren Hayes?" My mom answered that yes, Darren Hayes, who was my father, was her ex-husband. And then shockingly, this Andrea woman had actually burst into tears, threw her arms around my mom in a hug, and began to tell her this horrific story about all the disgusting things that my dad had done to her. Apparently, when she was 14 years old, she was now in her mid-30s. I would have been about 4 years old at the time, so this would have happened around 1994. She had been dating a man named Andrew, who happened to be living with my dad at the time after my parents' divorce. According to Andrea, these men were her boyfriend Andrew, Andrew's twin brother Daniel, and my father, had taken turns beating her, raping her, and then forcing her to prostitute herself in order to make a little bit of money off of her. Eventually, they ended up selling her into child prostitution, from which she said she never recovered. At this point, I realized that this is where I'd recognize her from. My dad had been roommates with her boyfriend Andrew, and I used to see all three of them when I went over there to visit him every second weekend. She sobbed during the whole retelling of this story, telling my mother how after this traumatic experience, she had turned to drugs and alcohol to numb the pain of her abuse, and that she'd been addicted to crack and alcohol off and on ever since because of what my father had done to her. My mom was shocked. She didn't know what to do. On the one hand, she knew my father to be a generous, soft-spoken, and kind person who had never lifted a finger on her or any other person, and who rarely raised his voice. But on the other hand, it seemed odd that Andrea would just happen to remember his name all these years later, if she had been lying to her at least. She didn't know who to believe. After several hours of crying and much consoling on my mother's part, Andrea finally left. That was when the stalking began. A few days after this encounter, my mom came home from work to find Andrea's boyfriend sitting on her couch, waiting for her. He immediately told her that he was planning on killing my dad, and that my dad deserved to die because he was a pedophile rapist piece of shit, and that if my mom told anybody at all, especially the cops, that he would be sure to kill her as well. He then concluded his threat by describing the layout of our living room and exactly what outfit I was wearing that day. From then on, he and/or Andrea would text or call her several times a day to threaten and taunt her, telling her that they were going to call the cops on my dad and have him thrown in prison, that they were going to have him killed, and that if she told anybody, they would hire somebody to rape and murder me. Naturally, my mother was absolutely terrified. She was from an upper middle-class family who had immigrated to Canada from Germany. She had never dealt with this type of person before. She stopped eating, she couldn't sleep, and even stopped going to work. She lost 30 pounds, and her hair started falling out from all the stress. She started having panic attacks because she didn't know what to do. Later, she told me that she understood how I felt now, because I have an anxiety disorder that causes me to experience panic attacks. Eventually, after the night when I almost got stabbed, she decided that she had to call the cops. She couldn't take the chance that they would hurt me. She had to do something about it, and what she found out was shocking. Andrea was well known to the police. When my mom told them this story, she was so well known that they weren't even surprised to hear her story. In fact, they told her Andrea had done this exact same thing to at least a dozen other men. She would meet and blackmail men into giving her money, electronics, drugs, things like that, threatening to call the cops and report them for rape if they didn't. Her boyfriend, who was a dealer to other drugs than just weed, as it turned out, would often use his drug connections to intimidate and extort the men. And for some reason, he never questioned her story of being raped, abused, and enslaved by all these different men, because there is no doubt in my mind that he genuinely believed that she was telling the truth. Then when Andrea, who was a crack and heroin addict and prostitute, would get arrested on a possession or drug distribution charge, she would attempt to make deals with the police by offering them information about men who were rapists and pedophiles in exchange for less time in prison. She eventually did this so many times that the police stopped believing her. After my mom called the cops, the whole story came undone, and Andrea and her boyfriend, thankfully, haven't bothered us since. But it's been over a year since the whole thing happened, and I'm still terrified to leave the curtains open at nighttime in case somebody is watching me. I don't think I'll ever be able to feel fully safe in this house ever again. So Andrea, let's not meet again. Ever. I'm going to clear up some of the common questions that people have asked about this. First of all, I know some of you think this part is suspicious, but I assure you that it actually did happen to us. She remembered my dad because he used to be her boyfriend's roommate. I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear in the beginning. My dad was sharing an apartment with two twins named Andrew and Daniel, and Andrea was dating Andrew at the time. That's where I remembered her from. I used to go over there every second weekend just to visit my dad, and I used to play Lion King on Sega Genesis with Andrew all the time, and she was always hanging off of him. When I was 14, I was going through what my parents called teen angst. I would get aggressive over the smallest provocations. I got suspended from school for fighting. I started becoming mean and intolerable to be around. But I could be so nice and apologetic the next week or so, and the cycle would repeat itself. Hostility, mood swings, agitation, insomnia. Unbeknownst to me, or them, at the time I was suffering from bipolar disorder symptoms. Around my manic episodes, I would do really stupid things. I'd put myself into potentially fatal situations. Most of my friends stopped dealing with me, so I looked for new friends in the wrong places. I ended up coping with my episodes using illegal substances and alcohol. It was August, and school was starting back soon. I was having a really bad manic episode. I thought I was invincible, and everyone around me was jealous because they weren't having as much fun as me. I thought I was smarter than everybody. My parents took me to a psychiatrist, but I never spoke a word to her. I never even looked at her. I was in denial that something was very wrong with me. Around this time, my sense of danger and fear was very low. This particular manic episode was lengthy and lasted about 3 weeks. 1 week into the episode, I came up with the perfect idea that I should run away from home. I would survive by selling weed, and I would become the greatest cannabis salesman that lived. For those who aren't similar with the bipolar disorder, understand that while manic, sufferers can have delusional and grandiose ideas or thoughts. I packed up a few items, stole about $327 from my dad's wallet, copped a huge amount of weed, and went to a seedier part of town. I checked into a motel room. The woman never asked for identification, probably because I looked 18 or 19, and she just didn't give a fuck. I went 3 days on the run, and had only sold about 2 bags. I smoked until there was no more to sell. I had also spent a majority of my money on booze, and a new dress. I had to think of a way to make some more cash. I didn't want to go back home to my jealous family. I was coming back from a restaurant when a middle-aged dude in a blue car pulled beside the curb. He rolled down the window and offered me $100 to have sex with him. I agreed. Hold on, I wasn't actually going to prostitute myself. I thought I was so smart and conniving that he would just put the money in my hand and I would run off with it. So, we go to the motel not far from the one that I was hiding out at. I had it planned out perfectly. I would run out with the money in my hand. I believed that I was strong enough to fight a 5'11" man who had a lot of muscle. I believed that I wasn't in any danger. We go into the room, which smelled like feet, and I asked him for the money. The dude ignores me and started kissing me and trying to take my clothes off. Most sane females would have been frightened, but I wasn't exactly sane. So, I wasn't really worried about rape or injury. I forcefully pulled away from him, and he slapped the shit out of me. He slapped me so hard that I had a brief moment of clarity and ran to the bathroom and locked the door. I opened the window and just jumped out. My adrenaline and shock eventually wore off, and I actually laughed at the whole thing. Luckily, a police officer recognized me as a missing person and took me home to my parents before I could do anything else dangerously stupid. Thinking back on the situation, I don't find anything about my actions humorous. My stomach churns a little bit thinking about how he could have raped me, even murdered me. I'm now taking medication for my illness. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.